Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cosmic Connection. This is the place where we explore the order and the beauty of the cosmos and your connection to it all. My name's Amanda Walsh. I'm the founder of Astrology Hub. I am here with our favorite cosmic navigator, Rick Levine. And Rick, there's some serious excitement brewing about the chart reading extravaganza that we're having in August.
Yeah, I love that word, extravaganza.
Again, I'm amazed that we were able to sneak that in and that y'all seem to love it as well. So we're running with it. If you haven't yet signed up, which I know a lot of you have, but if you haven't signed up for the chart reading extravaganza in August, where Rick is going to be on every Thursday in August, reading 2 students' charts live, reading the person, interpreting the placements, the aspects, all those good things, and also explaining to you, the student, why he is saying what he's saying. You can sign up now.
Well, and just remember that it's not just an interpretation. We can do that of famous people or famous dead people. The real magic is going to be that you'll see on the screen, like you're seeing you and me now, you'll see me and the person whose chart's being done, and I'll be interacting with them as if I was interacting with a client in my office, as they will be interacting with me. But at the same time, then I'll turn to the audience, to the group, to the other viewers, and say, here's why we're going down this path. Now, Amanda, how does that work for you? So there'll be this kind of triangulation. And as I've said before, the magic of these, when the magic is there, and hopefully it is every time, is that you can't script it, because these are real people having their charts done real time, and you just never know what's going to be under the rock that you lift up. And we've had some, and I've been doing this, or a variation on this, with my patrons on Patreon, and you just don't know what you're going to get into. It's powerful stuff. So I'm excited for it. And yeah, the buzz out there, I'm getting a lot of email and text messages. People seem to be really excited. And, one of the sweetest things I got was a post on Instagram today that was just it was praising, and it was basically praising me, but it shouldn't be for me. It should be for you in Astrology Hub. And that was, they were praising the fact that the cost was not in the same range as many other online courses are, that basically it was I'm signing up, but there are so many courses that come and go that I can't do because I just don't have that kind of money. And I'm just really appreciative of that. You've made it really accessible, so.
Yeah. Well, that actually is a reflection of you as well, because you've been very committed to making sure that Astrology Foundations Level 1, Level 2, and then now this version of Level 3 is accessible, and that as many people as possible can take these courses and the different things that we're offering together. So,
right, but we decided to call it level 3.14 in reference to pi being 3.14, and a horoscope, we're reading horoscopes, is in the shape of a pie cut into 12 pieces.
Exactly. But if people missed it last week, that we talked about that in depth last week. So it's not too late to join. The first session is August 5th, 2021. And you can join us at astrologyhub.com/extravaganza. That's astrologyhub.com/extravaganza. And if you're watching this after August 5th or after August of 2021, you can still go to that link and access the recordings from that event. So we're excited to have as many of you with us live as possible. The other thing is there won't be any cosmic connections in August, because we'll be doing the chart reading.
This will be the cosmic extravaganza instead. Yeah. And the other thing that people should realize, that if you can't make Thursday afternoons at 5 p.m. Pacific time or 8 p.m. Eastern time, which is when the live event will occur, no problem, because within 24 hours, it will be up and available to you forever. So it's not like you have to be there live unless your chart was selected. And we're going to be going through that selection process soon, picking out charts that resonate and have teaching value. So it's, it's going to be fun.
Okay. And I can feel the oh no, did I miss the place where I was supposed to submit my chart? No, you haven't missed it. We haven't sent the email out yet to the people who have registered. So don't worry. The email is going to come soon. Make sure you submit your chart as soon as possible, because we will be looking at the charts as they come in, and Rick will be selecting them. So the sooner you get your chart in, the better your chance is of being selected.
Yeah,
also,
and if you attach a $50 bill to your email, no, I'm kidding.
No. Okay. Also, if you're a student in Astrology Foundations level 1 or 2, you also have a much better chance of being selected for one of the students whose charts are being read. And no, you don't have to submit your chart. So if you're one of those people going, oh my gosh, I would never want my chart read live in front of a bunch of people, you don't have to submit your chart. You'll be one of the people in the audience. You'll be learning from Rick as he goes along. So, okay, I think we covered everything. Yeah?
Yeah, okay. I think so.
Okay, chart, astrologyhub.com/extravaganza. Easy to remember. Okay, so today we are talking about something that we get asked about all the time, Rick. I surveyed our inner circle members and asked them what they wanted to learn about from you. And asteroids was one of the biggest things that was requested. People want to know which asteroids you use, why you use them, how to use asteroids in chart reading, which I'm sure we'll go into a little bit in August as well. But I just wanted to set the stage here today and give you a chance to talk about it.
Yeah. Well, before we jump into the topic, I've always been curious as to, I think when they named them, I think they I think they flipped asteroids and hemorrhoids, because asteroids seem like they should mean something else, but I don't know.
Rick, only you. Has anybody else had that thought? I've never had that thought. That's amazing. Okay.
Thank you. I have it every day. No, I'm kidding. Well, the thing about asteroids, which is really interesting, is that for I don't know how many thousand years, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 years, astrologers only used 7 visible planets, 7 planets. And they were and of course, when we astrologers use the word planets, we are using it in the Greek sense of a planeta. Planetus is a wanderer. And so the sun and moon were considered planets. And just like I always remind my students that we don't give a crap what the astronomers call a planet, whether they have demoted Pluto or not. It doesn't matter. We call the sun and moon planets, and that's just part of the classical vernacular. But, for thousands of years, we got by with the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Boom, 7. That was it. And it was only in the late 18th century, 1780 something, 1781, I think, that Uranus was discovered, and then Neptune in the 19th century and Pluto in the 20th century. But as we began discovering things, it's unbelievable how many things are going around the sun. NASA tracks upwards to 1 million objects going around the sun. And so for those of us who just think it's, the sun, moon, Mercury, or the Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and maybe, a few asteroids and a few other things. No, there's hundreds of thousands of things. And so really, before we jump into the use of specific asteroids, the real question is, where do we cut off? What is important and what is not important? And I think here the most important thing to understand is that the cosmos is by nature, and it's a double entendre of using that word nature. By nature, it is fractal. That's what nature is. Nature is literally, by nature, it is fractal. And what that means is that wherever you're looking, you're seeing a pattern that is contained within a smaller pattern, smaller and smaller. And what that means is that if you do a reading, and I've done like flash readings for people just knowing their sun or their sun, moon, and ascendant, you can do that. but it's like a hologram. And that is, if you have a hologram, which is like a three-dimensional representation, I want to say photograph, but it's not really a photograph, that's done with lasers, that when you have a hologram on a flat piece of glass and you move it back and forth, you get some three-dimensionality to it. But if you take a hologram and break it in half, both halves have the same picture, just with a little less definition. And if you break it in half again and again and again, each part of the hologram contains the whole image. And so when we're doing astrology, it's important to understand that whatever level we put the power of our microscope on, we're like looking at a hologram that is giving us a part of the whole picture, and that will never have all the details. And so that's an important thing to understand before we even address what asteroids we use, because there are traditional astrologers who do not use, or who put a much lesser value on using Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto because they're invisible. Now, we could have a separate hour-long discussion on how the advent of the use of invisible planets is actually correlated to the fact that our world, our reality, what we describe as real, has become more and more and more and more and more invisible. It used to be, going back 250 years, that if you couldn't see it, it didn't exist, period. Things existed because they were sensed, and we've moved beyond that.
Rick, are you of the mindset that certain planets and asteroids and things come into our awareness when we're ready to expand into whatever the energy or message or invitation of that planet or asteroid is?
Yeah, the as above, so below, the within of things is as the without of things. When something happens on the inside, it happens simultaneously on the outside. When something happens on the outside, it simultaneously happens on the inside. I wouldn't say that we discover it when we're ready. I would say that the inner and outer discoveries arise mutually. Remember, as you know, and as most of my students know, I'm a strong proponent of the use of quintiles and septiles. Well, quintiles were introduced into astrology by Johannes Kepler 400 years ago. But no one ever really used them, or very few people. Now they are gaining widespread use. Why? Because they've come into our inner world, and it was a prophet, or not a prophet, but a visionary who could actually see them. So yes, absolutely, the inner and the outer arise mutually. And when we discover new ways of looking at things on the outside, it's because we need ways to describe what's going on the inside.
Okay, so you've set us up with this hologram analogy, and you asked the question. So if there's all these things floating around, where do we cut it off? Where do we start the interpretation and the interpretation?
And as I said, there are astrologers, typically, what's the right word? Radical isn't the word I'm looking for. Extreme. There's strict classicists, who will only use the Hellenistic, the Greek, or for that matter, Vedic astrologers, because in Vedic astrology, technically, the Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto don't matter. Now, most modern Vedic astrologers, at least here in the United States, also use Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, because it just takes doing a few charts to realize that, Pluto or Uranus has as much import in a natal chart as does the visible planets. But remember, when those invisible planets were discovered by use of technology, telescopes, at first they were all considered to be radical, bad, evil, non-integratable, out there. They were something else. And that's not the case anymore. And that shift in thinking is really, really important. And the the real deal, here is that again, getting back to Johannes Kepler, he actually wrote in, I think it might have been his Mysterium Cosmographicum, he actually hypothesized a planet between Mars and Jupiter. And there's this whole thing called Bode's Law, which has to do with the mathematics, and that the planets basically fall on this ratio. And yet everyone knew there was a large gap between Mars and Jupiter. But when Uranus was discovered, it actually was discovered at the exact point in its distance from the sun that this curiosity that Kepler stumbled onto would have predicted. So there's something here about these ratios. And it is said that when I think it was, God, I wish I'd done more. I think it was in like 1800 that the first of the asteroids was discovered, and that was Ceres. And then within a few years, there were several more excuse me, several more asteroids discovered, including Pallas and Juno and Vesta and others. But these asteroids were now located in the area that was predicted by Bode's Law, which said there should have been a planet there, which leads many people to assume that what we call the asteroid belt is actually the fragments of a planet that once existed between Mars and Jupiter and was destroyed, whether it was by an impact of a large event or whether the civilization of intelligent beings living there developed nuclear weaponry and blew the planet up. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying something exploded this and fragmented it into what we now call the asteroid belt. And so there's this geometric kind of consistency to the planets. But here's the interesting thing. When Ceres was discovered, it was immediately called a planet. A new planet was discovered. And then when Pallas was discovered, it was also said another new planet. Oh my God, they're all over the place. And it was only as they began to realize that there was many of these objects, planetoids, little planets floating around in this area between Mars and Jupiter, that they began to realize that these weren't planets, that this was something else. And the asteroids were actually given numbers based upon their order of discovery. And at first they were named after, they were given feminine names, which is, and we'll get to that in a moment, the importance of asteroids as goddesses. But as you began to get more and more and more, they ran out of names. And so there are now names of not only female asteroids, but male asteroids. But as time went on, asteroids were named after everything. There's an asteroid named Hamburger. There's an asteroid, named Pittsburgh. There's an asteroid named Doo-Doo. I mean, they're just, because there are about 10,000 asteroids with names.
Whoa.
Okay. So do you use asteroids? Yeah. Every chart I calculate the 10 planets that we all use plus 10,000 asteroids. Not.
So do we just use the ones that were found first? Is that really what's happening here?
Well, that's an interesting story, and I'm gonna and we'll get there in just a second. But I just want to mention two things on the way into this. One is that one of the conclusions that we have to grapple with that came from the development of quantum theory is this idea of non-locality, which basically says that things do not have to be close to one another in order for them to be connected, in order for them to have an interrelationship. And I want to cycle back to that in a moment, because it's important when people say, oh, no, I don't use asteroids. There are just too many. And there are many astrologers who don't use asteroids. It's just, where do you stop? In fact, the person who I like to refer to as the academic dean of astrology on planet Earth, that would be Rob Hand. Rob Hand refers to asteroids as space gravel.
Huh.
So there's someone who's coming from a class, and I'm not saying that Rob says that they have no use or no value, but it's the idea that it's like when you go to a beach, does every pebble on the beach have impact? Well, if there's a sharp pebble that you happen to step on and it cuts your foot open, you get tetanus and die. Well, then that little tiny pebble had a huge impact. So yeah. we have to be careful about dismissing, I believe, what some people would refer to as space gravel. Now, the other thing about non-locality brings me to something that I really can't pass over on our discussion of asteroids. And it has to do with a book that hugely influenced my life back in, and I want to get a sense of, I don't even think it says when it was actually published, but I'm thinking it was about 1973 or 4 or something in there. And that is this book right here, which is called Astrophysical Directions. And it's by Michael and Margaret Erlewein. And I know you had Michael Erlewein on your podcast a few weeks ago. And Michael was an extremely important influence in my early astrology. In fact, I visited him back when he was still down in Ann Arbor at Heart Center Books before he moved up north with Matrix Software. But this book, Astrophysical Directions, is simply a book of tables. It's just lots and lots and lots of data. Ooh. And what it is, it's it's the actual location from Earth's point of view out in the sky of, I'm just trying to give you a sense of not only the planets and their orbital data, but asteroids, meteors, comets, the nearest stars, the local star system, the locations of the various spiral arms of the galaxy, and then things like not only about 800 fixed stars, those that are named. That's like the 10,000 named asteroids, of which there are probably more like I've heard 40 to 100,000 asteroids. But it doesn't matter. Over 10,000 to me is too many. But in astrophysical directions, you can actually locate in your chart where there's galactic nebula or star clusters or Seyfert galaxies, external galaxies, radio sources, black holes, quasars, pulsars. So the thing is, and this is really mind blowing. I spent a year or so down this rabbit hole really deep, and because once you accept that non-locality is a rule, it's something that works. We think that the moon is so important because it's so close to Earth. But anyone who's had a transit of Pluto conjuncting their sun or moon, or anyone who's born with Pluto in a hard aspect to an inner planet, knows that the moon is just a little bit of a wimp compared to the intensity and power of Pluto. Mm. So the idea that close always doesn't mean more important. Now, if you take that at its fullest, what that means is if you were born with Venus lined up with a quasar, or Mars lined up with the Andromeda galaxy, or a close star like Alpha Centauri, or an asteroid, or, it changes the whole picture that we're working with just the tip of an iceberg. And, I grew up knowing what that meant until I saw a picture of an iceberg with a tip. And I went, holy shit, I had no idea. I just thought that, so anyone if you've never seen a picture of an iceberg with the tip, it's something worth looking at. It's like looking at the city, of Tulsa, Oklahoma, thinking that you've seen the United States. That's the difference in size. So going into
real quick, Rick, before you move on beyond Michael, I had a vision of having you and Michael on the podcast together. Wouldn't that be so fun?
Yeah, I enjoy Michael's company a lot, and he is. If Rob Hand is the academic dean of astrology, what would Michael's title be? Michael is much more on the ground where the rubber meets the road.
Right.
Although Michael is a true polymath. He's not only contributed hugely to astrology knowledge, but of course he was a pioneer in computers and astrology. Right. I mean, he was the absolute singular.
Yeah,
he was the singular leader in that. But he also is an authority and an expert and has written books on macro photography and his love of music. Most people, when they go online and search for a book or a song, a song, or use Shazam, they don't realize that they're accessing something that's a corollary of what Michael developed called the all music library, the all music something or other. And I mean, he had a compendium of every piece of recorded music ever, that he then sold that, and so he had money to put into his astrology work. But no, Michael is amazing, and I totally respect and honor him. And I should also say, as long as we're on the subject in passing, that Jeff Jower, many people know, is deceased now, I guess about five years or so, was for 15 plus years. Jeff and I worked together on a daily basis, developing StarIQ.com and writing 8 years of Barnes & Noble books and teaching around the world and doing a daily podcast. We did a daily podcast every day for 14 years.
Oh, my God.
That Jeff actually worked for Michael. He actually moved up to Big Rapids, Michigan, and was customer support. So Michael's thing in my life is big. So we got totally sidetracked there.
We totally did. I'm sorry. It just, when you were bringing him up, I literally was going back and forth with him on Facebook Messenger the other day, and I was like, Rick and Michael together, that would be so much fun. Okay, so go back. So we have all.
And I loved your interview with him. And I would suggest anyone here who's listening to this, go find the podcast. Maybe Jamie or someone could figure out what the number is and put it up there, because it was a brilliant interview, and you really did a nice job of honoring someone who should be honored.
Thank you for that. Okay, so we were talking about all the different. I mean,
so all I'm saying is that when we go into looking at asteroids, even if we're only using 4 asteroids, and many astrologers only use 4 asteroids, but even that's now begun to disintegrate. And there was, I mean, pretty much asteroids were not used by astrologers. There weren't, you couldn't find where they were. And it really was, and I'm using Demetra George, who I'll say more about in a moment. And for those of you who recognize Demetra's name, she wrote the workbook that we used in Foundations Level 2. And Demetra is one of the amazing teachers on the planet, not only with respect to asteroids, pioneering work, but also with respect to Hellenistic astrology in general. But according to Demetra, that it was 1973 when there was the first asteroid ephemeris. Remember, there were no computers then for calculating. And so that ephemeris had Ceres, Pallas, Juno, and Vesta. And that was basically the product of the work of a New York astrologer and leader or pioneer even in asteroids, and that was Eleanor Bach. And so the thing is that there were several other people who began to work in that area, and then when Chiron was discovered, that was like I think in 72, 73. And then when Chiron was discovered in 1977, I only remember that because that was the year my daughter was born. That was immediately put into the various ephemerides, and then Lee Lehman jumped in, and there was a publication of an ephemeris of minor asteroids. And so it began a whole bunch of work of a lot of astrologers then began jumping in. But the second piece of this asteroid puzzle was that in 1980, Demetra George wrote this book. And for those of you who were in Foundations Level 2, I think maybe even in Level 1, I mentioned this, but we went deeper into this in Level 2. Demetra George wrote this book called The Asteroid Goddesses. And this really became the Bible for people who wanted to get into asteroids. And I'll say more about this in just a moment. But then there was a program developed by Mark Pottinger that generated positions for I don't know how many thousand asteroids. And that program was made available to the public. And all of a sudden, boom, asteroids was off and running. Work was done on Chiron, turned into books by people like Barbara Hand Clow, who I know you had on recently on an interview, Melanie Reinhardt, who's a brilliant astrologer and a dear friend, and many other people. And then there were people that came along like Jacob Schwartz, who his research was absolutely encyclopedic when it came to like strange little, I don't want to say little things, but, okay, so there's an asteroid named Sax, S-A-X. Bill Clinton played the saxophone. He only played it publicly once in his whole life, and it was while he was running for president. Arsenio Hall asked him if he would play saxophone live on the Arsenio Hall show. And for those of you who are younger, that was like one of the late night talk shows. And he did. And on the night that he played saxophone on nationally televised TV, the asteroid Sax was conjuncting, the transiting asteroid Sax in real time was conjuncting Bill Clinton's natal sun. Not saying that proves anything, but it's pretty crazy. And there's 1,000 stories like that when you get into these minor aspects that shouldn't mean anything. And I mean, there's an asteroid probably named Amanda. There's ones named Rick Fred. There's an asteroid named Merlin. Why is it conjunct my midheaven? I don't know. There's an asteroid named Atlantis. It's on my ascendant. Why? I don't know. These things may be totally unimportant. But I do know, and I've told this story many times, I think I even told it in Level 2, that when I had Demetra George was staying at my home many years ago, 25 years ago, and she offered to look at my chart, and it was one of the most memorable chart readings I ever had, because we sat down at my dining room table and she had all of her calculations, and she told me the story of Icarus and Daedalus. Icarus, the inventor, Daedalus, the inventor, who was, the story's too long, but he was basically put in a labyrinth that he couldn't get out of on an island there with his son. And he basically, because he was this brilliant inventor, he got wings that were from flying birds flying overhead. He built his son wings so his son could escape. And he warned him not to go too close to the sun or the wax would melt and he would drown, and not to go too close to the ocean because the moisture would blah, 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 blah. And she told me this whole story in great detail because it turns out that I have a sun-moon square in my chart natally, and the planet Daedalus the asteroid Daedalus is conjunct my sun, and Icarus is conjunct my moon, so they are square in my chart. And I never had a more meaningful reading in my entire life. It was just the story of Icarus and Daedalus.
Wow.
Again, what the hell? So the reason why I'm spending time on this on the front end is because I'm trying to paint a picture that the amount of asteroid research that's been done recently, I say recently in the past 20, 30 years is amazing. And the stories are amazing. And now there's computer software that'll generate zodiac positions for over 15, I think it's maybe 15 to 20,000 asteroids. And so you can't use them all because it's like pebbles on a beach. It's not even like pebbles. It's like grains of sand. There's just way, way too much. And so we have more data than we've ever had. And the question is, where do we cut off? And here's what I want to say. If you don't use asteroids and you've never used asteroids, it does not mean, I know double negative here, it doesn't mean that your readings are lacking, because the universe, the cosmos, is fractal. And depending upon what we look at, that gives us the pattern that then is replayed and replayed, corroborated at every level that we look deeper and deeper and deeper. Now, it turns out that most astrologers use the asteroids that Demetra George used in her Asteroid Goddess book, which was basically Juno, Ceres, Pallas, or Pallas Athene, or Pallas Athena, and what am I missing? Juno, and Ceres, Juno, Ceres, Pallas, and Vesta. I was missing Vesta. Hope she forgives me. I was surprised to learn, however, that these four asteroids, which most astrologers will use at the beginning, were not the four largest asteroids. In fact, it turns out that that let me just think which one this is. That Ceres is the largest, Vesta is the second largest, Pallas is the third largest. Hygeia is the fourth largest asteroid. And then comes Europa and Interamnia and Sylvia and I don't know, Patientia, Hector. Juno is 13th. So why the hell are we using four asteroids, the three largest, and Juno, which almost everyone who's doing asteroids uses, because Juno is the 13th largest asteroid? And it turns out that the reason is that these four asteroids were named after the four Olympian goddesses, Ceres, Vesta, Pallas, and Juno. And this had a lot to do with Demetra George's early work and what became part of a much larger wave, certainly larger than Demetra ever thought it might be, and that is the wave of the refeminization of astrology. I've said many, 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 many times here and other places that astrology was largely written by guys for guys. I mean, it was kept alive in the monasteries by the priests. It was done for, kings and emperors, and when they should go to war and important things like that. I mean, women didn't do astrology. They weren't even allowed to read or write, no less do complex mathematics. And on top of that, doing charts for women, you'd only do that if the king or the duke or the emperor said, here's this Person who I'm thinking of making queen, what's her fortune, and so in some ways it's still used similarly by people who go to their astrologer to get a chart done for every new person they meet and are considering to date or marry or whatever. But the four main, when people say the four main when people say the four main asteroids, they're normally referring to the four asteroid goddesses rather than the four main asteroids, which would be, if you were talking about size mattering, it would be Ceres, Vesta, Pallas, and Hygeia. Now, it turns out that most of the modern astrology software now actually has Hygeia in the mix because it's large enough and because it's health related, it seems like that's something that people want to know about. But where you cut off is really your decision. Solar Fire allows you, I think it automatically will plot, I think about 20 or so asteroids, including Psyche, and some of them seem to have meanings that are more immediately graspable by concept, and some kind of sit outside that realm. It's an area of huge, potentially important research. But here's one other thing to consider before we just delve down a little bit deeper into the four or five asteroids that most people use, is that originally an asteroid was anything that wasn't a planet. If it wasn't a planet, well, that meant it was an asteroid. And yet it turns out that there are really three different groupings of what might be considered asteroids. And that is the asteroids that are in what we call the asteroid belt, those that travel between the orbit of Mars and Jupiter. But when Chiron was discovered in 1977, and Chiron actually cuts inside the orbit of Saturn and goes outside the orbit of Uranus, and it immediately became embraced and used by astrologers. At first they said it was an asteroid, and then they said, no, maybe it's a comet. Oh, maybe it's some sort of just lesser minor planet. But within 10 or 15 years, Pholos was discovered, and Nessus, and Asbolos, and Hylonomy, and Chariklo, and they were all things that were moving in that same area of space, in effect, between Saturn and Uranus, and they weren't asteroids. So they've become labeled centaurs, and they're all named for centaurs. Chiron is unique when it comes to centaurs because he was one of the centaurs that actually wasn't a party animal. And most people think of Chiron as the wounded healer. Chiron was the original mentor. Chiron basically taught Asclepius and Jason of the Argonauts, and I mean he was the teacher. But these things all are used by astrologers, even though many only use Chiron. There are many astrologers who use and have written books and work with the other centaurs also. But then the third area, when we're talking about non-planets that we use, asteroids, is the area that we call the Kuiper Belt, which Pluto is about 2 billion miles from the sun. And the Kuiper Belt extends about 7 billion miles out past there, about 6-7 billion miles. And so early in the 21st century, we discovered just a pile, one after another, of planets or of things that were way out beyond Pluto, including Eris, which many astrologers are using for the same reason that many astrologers use the four asteroid goddesses. And that is, Demetra wrote a book about it, and people could read it and interpret them and understand them. Well, Henry Seltzer wrote a book about Eris called The 10th Planet. And in it, he makes a very powerful case for using Eris in a birth chart. But there's Orcus and Haumea and Makemake and Varuna and Ixion and who am I missing? Sedna and a whole pile of others that don't have names yet. And the point is that these two have impact. And I know for many new astrologers, this is like totally overwhelming. Well, fine. Go back and use only 7 planets. Don't even use Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto for a while. Then add Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And then add an asteroid or 3 or 4 or 5. And then as you look at charts, especially for those who have access to the computer, most astrologers do, whether it's your own software or even on Astrodienst, astro.com has their ephemeris has locations of more asteroids than you can deal with, and you can pick the variety of what you want actually calculated and just begin your process of discovery. So that's kind of, as far as I'm concerned, when we're talking about asteroids, rather than talking about what Ceres in the 12th house in Gemini means, I think it's more important to understand, how does this fit into the bigger framework? If we truly believe that as above, so below, the within and the without are the same, then we can't shirk from the conclusion that everything up there has meaning, just like everything in here has meaning. And so that's a really important thing to grapple with. And I think more than anything, when we're talking about asteroids, that's the thing that we need to understand. Descartes was wrong. Descartes said, if I have enough data points, I can tell you everything about the universe. And the Cartesian coordinates come from Descartes. And it's just not true. The more we know, the more we realize there's more to know, and there's more that we don't know.
I thought this would be a simple topic with some simple answers as usual.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
So basically, we're 47 minutes in, and what we've done is establish that there's over 10,000 asteroids.
Well, there's 400,000 asteroids.
Exactly, probably 400,000. There's lots of different kinds. There's these asteroids that are between the Mars and Jupiter, the asteroid belt ones. There's these centaurs, which are outside of that area. I can't remember exactly where you said.
Between Saturn and Uranus. And technically, we don't call them asteroids anymore. We call them centaurs.
Centaurs, right? Yeah.
And then we there's have the Oort body.
Ones.
Yeah, the Oort belt or Kuiper belt, Oort cloud.
Okay. All right. And within these different areas, there's asteroids that we've decided to use and interpret.
Exactly.
Mainly what I'm getting from you is we're using and interpreting the ones that people have written books about, which
Pluto. Pluto is not any different. In fact, Eris is larger than Pluto in size. So yeah, go ahead.
Wow, yeah. I mean, so basically the ones that people have written books about, that they've done extensive research on, that we have some information we can use, these are the ones that are mainly being used in astrology right now. That's not to belittle the fact that they actually seem to have impact and can actually really lend another layer of interpretation to the reading, which only opens up the mystery of what the heck is astrology in the first place even more. And what is this universe? It just opens up even more questions, because it's like we can find meaning and correlation and correspondence and quality, useful information. It seems like everywhere we look.
Everywhere we look. And just to pull this back into context, I mean, so when I see a new client, I typically, I would say 50% of the time, I don't calculate the asteroids on a first-time client. Why? Because I already have so much to go on that I can't even integrate that. Now, if I see a client the second or third time, or for some clients, I just happen to have asteroids on, and if they're there, I go, holy smokes, this person, has Juno conjunct their and all of a sudden my mind goes down that. And in some cases, it's like not every client that I see do I talk about quintiles or septiles. Not every client I see do I talk about Chiron, but if Chiron stands out, it stands out. But by the same token, the same would be true with with Chariklo or other centaurs. The same is true with Eris these days. I have Eris turned on my calculations now, so I see it. But when I talk to a client, unless Eris stands out in the chart somehow, I don't necessarily mention it. But when it comes to the 4 or 5 main asteroids, it's really quite simple. And I don't feel like we need to go into it here now. We could on another session, actually. But there's so much information out there. I mean, Ceres comes from the word cereal comes from Ceres. Ceres is it's like a super moon. That's a real planet. Well, she's not a real planet, but it's going around the sun rather than around the earth. Ceres is the nurturer. Ceres is the goddess of the grain that feeds us. The word cereal is Ceres. It's Ceres is that which feeds us and nurtures us and cares for us. Pallas is also feminine, but she's like, Pallas is kind of, I always think of her as a masculine Venus. She's not masculine. I mean, gender wise, Pallas is a goddess, and her symbol, the symbol for Pallas, looks like Venus, except instead of a circle on the top, it has a square. And I always think of Pallas as the eldest daughter who's doing the father's business. She's the executive carrying the briefcase, but she's like Angelina Jolie in some movie where she's running a multi-million-dollar, corporation that's taking over the world, and she's dressed in a business suit, but she's feminine, but you don't want to mess with her because she's got work to do. She's a warrior. Pallas is a warrior. And then Juno, who's really the queen of Olympus. Juno was Jupiter's wife. And this is a bit interesting because although Juno in our charts often represent that part of us that it's the marriage planet in a way. But Juno, basically Juno was the good wife, and she was married to Jupiter, who was maybe the most philandering of all the Olympians. I mean, Jupiter would go off on these adventures and conquering, and they would often involve sexual escapades, with other women and young boys and goats and, and Juno was the faithful wife. She was always there. She kept the household. She was always there. Now, occasionally she did get jealous and maybe turned a couple of Jupiter's lovers into stone and things of that sort. But Juno is still, she's the queen. And then Vesta, we think of Vesta as in relationship to the Vestal virgins. But here we have to be careful about the use of the word virgin and what it might have meant in Greece as opposed to what it means now. But Vesta was a priestess. And the high priestess of, but remember that in that period of time, many priestesses were conducting rites of healing that were called the initiation into the Eleusinian mysteries. And these were sexual in nature. And the deal is that no man could come and ask for or demand these rights. They had to be offered. And here we have the real meaning of the word virgin, which really is less about never having had sex than it is about the ability to say no. It's that discriminatory process of Vesta as a priestess was not property, was not owned by a man. And in fact, the prostitutes were considered virgins too, because they were not property. They could say no, but Vesta had this whole piece of service, had this whole piece of maintaining the fire, the hearth, or the not the hearth, but the fire of illumination, the spirit. And Vesta was in service. But then we have asteroids like Eris, who was the lover. And Chiron, which many people say is like an asteroid, who is either the mentor, teacher, or the healer. And Chariklo, who was also related to Chiron and the caretaker. But we have other asteroids like Psyche, which has to do with our soul, or Hygeia, which has to do with healing. And in fact, any of these asteroids, if they are in strong aspect to a natal planet, have resonance in your chart. It doesn't mean that every asteroid is going to resonate strongly in every chart, but even just calculating 4 or a half a dozen or so asteroids and seeing which ones might be yours, might be relatable in your chart, that then would encourage that could encourage you to learn more about that asteroid so you can see how that influences you. By the same token, asteroids transit just like planets, even though their orbits are circular. They also have retrograde motion, and their orbits vary very greatly from one to another. But you can actually calculate a transiting asteroid to your natal planet, or in fact, transiting planets to your natal asteroids. And, and as far as interpretation, on Foundations Level 2, we actually had one class, one lesson that was on the asteroids, where we, dug a little bit deeper into these. And in fact, we had a separate class on the centaurs. But the point here is that using these, if one is going to use the planets, one actually can use asteroids, and one can pick and choose. And in fact, even going down through a list of the names of a planet, if one strikes you as a name that feels like it might be strong, find out where that planet is in your chart, look it up, and learn about it.
Okay, so if you have a strong aspect to an asteroid in your chart, that's something to look into. If you have an asteroid transiting something in your chart and activating certain parts of your chart, and this may seem arbitrary, but there's a magic in it. If there's one that you're just pulled to or drawn to and you want to know more, look at what it's doing in your chart, because probably it has significance for you.
I would say all of that's true. The one caveat I would say, that if you're looking at transiting asteroids, the question becomes, which ones do you look at? Because
Right.
You can't just say, give me all the aspect to 5 or 1,000 asteroids. You'd just be overwhelmed in data.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And one probably not quick question, but let's see if you can do it quickly. Do you think the planets and asteroids have the spirit of the goddesses and gods, or do they just have matching descriptions? Like, I guess it's really around the naming convention. Why are they named these things? And this is from Miriam.
Again, they began being named after feminine goddesses, but or feminine names, but that got lost. And again, there are asteroids. I'm looking at a list of the A's. This is a list of 26,000 asteroids, but I'm seeing that there is an asteroid called Akashi. There's an asteroid called Anu. There's an asteroid called Agni, which is fire, I think, in Sanskrit. There are many English words also, but there's an asteroid called Adelaide. So if I lived in Adelaide, in Australia, I'd probably want to know where Adelaide was in my chart. There's an asteroid called Adirondack. Again, I'm just looking at a list of the A's just to give you an idea of how many there are. But if I lived in upstate New York, I'd be interested, or if I was going on a vacation, to Lake George or Lake Champlain up in in the vacation area of New York State, I'd say, where's the asteroid, Adirondack? Why am I relating to that? And so the list goes on and on. Astrodienst, I think, has, I don't even know how many thousands of asteroids, and you can go down the list and you can check which ones you want to, which ones you want to explore. But the list is like overwhelming. It just, it's just, yeah, I mean, and Astrodienst or astro.com, I think it lets you pick 10 objects at a time. But there is how many do they have? They have 26 separate lists. It's crazy how many. So picking them is an interesting thing. For people who don't have high-end astrology software, Astrodienst is certainly an online place where you can get this information easily.
Okay. And if you're new to astrology and this is super overwhelming, you can do great readings without these things, without including them at all. You can just start with the 7 and then add the outer planets and then decide if you want to start dabbling with some of these asteroids. Rick is saying just like start to look into 1 or 2 or just start to play around with it. And I think that's really important. I mean, you've been an astrologer for a lot of decades. And my guess is for the first many, many, many years, you probably barely used these at all. Did you?
Well, I didn't even know that they existed until probably the mid 70s when I came across Michael Erlewein's book, but it really wasn't until the early mid 80s when I got Dimitri George's book that I realized, that. But when I read that book, and I did use those 4 the goddesses, and again, asteroids kind of have been part of the process of the feminization. Look, there are of the 7 visible planets, 5 male, 2 female. It's not fair. You have the moon and Venus, and all the rest are guys. You add Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, there are 3 more guys. Although I think that a case could be made that Neptune, although as we know, Neptune actually raped Medusa, which is the origin of that story. Their offspring was Pegasus, and so we know Neptune was a dude, and we know that that he was a god. But Neptune, and that was from the Greeks' perspective, but in modern perspective, I think Neptune is a definitely is gender ambiguous. That Neptune certainly, as the higher octave of Venus even, has a feminine sense to it. But here's the deal. All of a sudden, there was Pallas, Juno, Ceres, and Vesta, and there were 4 more girls in the mix. They were goddesses. They weren't just normal women. Maybe all women are goddesses. But the point is that in talking with Dimitra about this, what happened was that her work began to become more widely known outside of astrology than inside of the community of astrology because of the wave of feminism that was growing through the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, that people who were not even into astrology, were attracted to a book called Asteroid Goddesses. And all of a sudden there was another whole wave of energy around this that was also part of astrology spreading out into a wider audience. Very important concept.
Okay, well, this is kind of reminding me of some of the things we've talked about recently, where sometimes people get really attached to one thing and saying this is the one to use and here's why. And you've really just kind of obliterated that and said
the hammer sees a world of nails.
Yes, exactly. So using what works for you is great, but being attached to that and saying this is the only thing that works or this is the best thing that works, that's where it's like, well, there's a lot of different options here.
There is, however, having said that, I think that knowing where the 4 asteroid goddesses are, maybe even adding Hygeia. There are a few others that others, programs have at the top of their list. But I think that they're important. But remember, there are so many points out there. I mean, we're not going into a discussion right now, of the nodes or of Lilith. But incidentally, most people, when they talk about Lilith these days, they're talking about the let me get this right. The apogee of the moon is Lilith. It's a real point. In other words, the moon's orbit around the Earth is not a circle; it's an ellipse. And in mathematics, a circle has a center, but an ellipse has 2 centers. And what that means is you can take 2 thumbtacks and put them into a piece of wood, and then put a piece of string around that with both thumbtacks on the inside, and then put a pen inside the string. And what it makes is an ellipse, because an ellipse has 2 centers. Well, when you're standing in one of the center, looking at the point that's farthest away, that's the apogee. The apogee is away from the Earth. You're basically looking through the other center. And when people use Lilith or Black Moon Lilith or Dark Moon Lilith, or most people are using the point at which the moon would be if it was at its apogee. My point here is that Lilith is a real mathematically calculatable point. There's nothing imaginary to it. Just like there's nothing imaginary to the ascendant, but you can't see it. There's nothing imaginary about the nodes. You can't see it.
Right.
And so, but there is also an asteroid named Lilith.
That's confusing.
Yeah. And many people use that also. So again, there's lots of things out there. The universe is, I'm always reminiscing about the Star Wars bar. In the early Star Wars movie, where there was a bar with every kind of crazy creature you could possibly imagine. That's what's out there. We like to think it's clean. Even just many people just track the new moons and full moons. They know their sun and their moon in their chart. Maybe they're ascendant. That's it. And then when they start digging in deeper, they begin to realize, well, geez, their Mercury is really important, and so is this, and so is that. And again, I would encourage any astrologer who knows their chart to at least learn where their 4 asteroid goddesses are, because that's an easy place to start. And again, that's, Ceres, the nurturer, Pallas, the warrior, Vesta, the servant or the priestess, and Juno, the wife. And my little one word thing.
Why isn't she the queen? Why is she the wife?
Well, why is she the wife? Because she is queen, because she's the wife of the king.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah. No, but you might actually say all women are goddesses and all men are gods. If that's the case, then your Juno is your queen. But it's her role. The role of her as queen was also wife.
Got it. Okay. And
it's not just wife, it was loyal wife. Loyal wife to a guy that some wives would consider an asshole and would have divorced him, on goat number 2.
Goat number 1. I'm sorry. Okay. All right. So also, would you include Chiron and Eris?
Well, I would say these are things that we would want to know about in our
right?
Yeah. And again, there are those people who would call me out and go, well, they're not asteroids. Asteroids have to be between Mars and Jupiter. And they're right. But I can't separate out from an astrological perspective those things that are not quite planets. Some of them are now considered to be minor planets. but as Pluto is considered to be a minor planet, Pluto, Eris, Juno, and Ceres all have the same astronomical standing now. The four of them are all considered to be a minor planet, sometimes referred to as Plutoids. But, Pluto and Chiron and the four asteroids that we just named, they're basically the placeholders for an entire universe of stuff.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, thank you. I mean, that was very comprehensive. I think it puts us all in a good perspective when it comes to learning about these things, whether or not you want to go down the rabbit holes. And then if there are ones that call you, there's probably a reason for that. There is a significance. And if you're sitting to have a reading with someone and something stands out, then that's also worth looking into. Yeah.
Yes, and for the record, in August Astrology Chart Reading Extravaganza Month, we will not use asteroids on every chart, but I will use I will do some charts where we kind of deep dive either into an asteroid or asteroids, or into Eris, or into the centaurs. So that will be part of it, but that doesn't mean that every astrologer should use all these points on every chart they do. Although I do know astrologers who calculate 8 centaurs and about 20 asteroids on every chart they do. Wow. And of course, you can actually, if you have the list, you can just go down and scan a list that are sorted by zodiac and going, oh, this is where that person's sun is. Look at that's lined up with the person's sun. So there are tools that would allow us to pick which ones we might want to use. But it can be overwhelming.
It'll be very fun and interesting to see which ones you choose to look at, why, and in what circumstances. So that'll be part of watching you read a chart. It's like, and you'll explain to us why you're looking at someone's Eris, or why you're looking at Chiron, or why you're looking at Juno in this particular situation.
Yeah, and I also should add here one other thing, and that is, although I use asteroids some, I would not consider myself the expert. I mean, I've even taught asteroids, but there are people who follow asteroids with a much higher level of interest and more experience than I have. So I'm just throwing that out there, that there are people out there that one could, if one wanted to pursue this, really, really deeply, there are people who teach courses in using asteroids and or centaurs.
Right. Okay. Fabulous. Thank you, Rick, for that amazing download. Thanks to all of you for being here. If you have not yet joined the extravaganza that we're having in August, the chart reading extravaganza, you can do that now. It's astrologyhub.com/extravaganza. Rick's going to be doing live chart reading for several very lucky students for you to witness and learn from. And you'll get to see the responses that the student has, and just see the whole entire process as if you're someone said they'd like to be a fly on the wall of that reading that Demetra did for you years ago. You'll get to be a fly on the wall for the readings that Rick's going to do for these students. And
I wish I had.
Well, you're going to be more than fly because Rick's going to know that you're there. So he's going to be actually talking to you about it.
I wish I had a recording of that reading. I mean, I have a very clear mental imprint, but and someone asked, when did Chiron come into the picture? I'm just glancing at the chat box for the first time. Chiron was discovered in 1977, and Antero Ali, who wrote a book called Astrologer back 20 plus years ago, pointed out that Chiron, again, so many people go, Chiron the wounded healer. Chiron was way wider than the archetype has a way wider cut than just wounded healer. Chiron is also a maverick. Just his orbit is, it comes inside of Saturn and then out to Uranus. And Antero Ali, that, we know that planets are discovered around the time that something in our consciousness, we talked about this at the very beginning, that Uranus was discovered around the time of the French and American revolutions. This was like a radical breakthrough, and Neptune was discovered at the height of the beginning of the steam engine and that whole age, and the beginning of psychic mediums and theosophy and animal magnetism and all those kinds of things, hypnosis. And Pluto, of course, came into being at the rise of mass fascism. And Chiron, Antero pointed out, was discovered in 1977, the year of the Sex Pistols. No, it's actually not meant to be funny, because this was we're talking punk, we're talking maverick, we're talking a breaking out of the bounds of what one conceived of as this is beautiful. No, listen to this. It really changed things. And so the person who asked when did Chiron come into the picture, it was then, and people jumped onto that bandwagon of what happens is Chiron was discovered, an ephemeris was printed, and 100 astrologers around began doing charts and looking at it and coming to the realization of this is what it meant.
Wow. Fascinating. Okay. Thanks, Rick, so much. Thanks to all of you for being here. Looking forward to spending August with you in the chart reading extravaganza. That's astrologyhub.com/extravaganza. And have fun exploring those asteroids and centaurs and Kuiper Belt friends.
And we'll see you next week for the August forecast.
Yes, next week, same time, same place, the last cosmic connection before we go into the chart reading month. All right, everybody, thank you so much. We'll see you soon. Thank you, Rick.